So if you go online right now, Google or YouTube, and you put in the words Miami real estate, you won't be surprised that it will auto-populate Miami real estate bubble or Miami real estate crash, and you're probably going to want to read it because it's quite clickbait-esque. And you will see videos like this one, this one, this one, or this one. Now I'm going to get into those actual videos and discuss them in more detail from a real-world perspective of someone who actually sells real estate every day and as an economist who analyzes it to give you my opinion. So to be clear, my name is David Siddons. I am president of the David Siddons Group. A caveat before we start this video. I am a real estate broker down here in South Florida. I run one of the highest production real estate teams in the country. I've been selling real estate for 15 years. And I've churned out about 100 reports over my career. And I continue to do so, not just with reports, but with articles and with other videos. And so over time, we've actually developed an award-winning website. And I wanted to put that out there as a caveat because I deal with buyers and sellers. If you watch this video, if you'd like to talk to me personally and get my opinion of the market, and more importantly, your personal situation, because the general market is less important than what's happening to you. And the reality is in South Florida, things do not all move as one big homogeneous blob. It is not a monolith where everything moves the same way. So that's my just starting caveat before we go into it. Now, let's get into the video. And the first one actually came from a guy called RJ Talks. He has a good amount of subscribers, 300,000 views, posted 5 months ago. So bearing in mind, a lot can happen in really 5-6 months.
The direction of the Florida housing market. And by what I can see from the data, if you're thinking about buying in Florida, you may want to wait.
But what he's done and what he's looked at, because he has a software, was called SnapForce, which is look at the migratory aspect of movement across the country and has considered the earnings between the different states and how the earnings that you make are influencing or not influencing the relationship between your annual income or the average annual incomes and the cost of the housing. So I put this question out to another expert as well, and we discussed it in a previous podcast. And we said, okay, so if earnings are now at a stage where houses are 10 times worth what you're making for your annual salary, so if you make $100,000 a year and the house is worth $1 million, you've got a disparity between what people can really afford to pay, and that's an unsustainable level to exist within the market. It should be somewhere around 5 or 6. It used to be lower in South Florida. In South Florida, there's a lot, as there are in many areas, there's a lot of what I call gray markets where people are making money, they're not reporting their full income, and the average, and again, maybe he's talking to the wider audience in the state, but when it comes into Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and again, admittedly, I'm a luxury real estate broker. I'm dealing at the higher end of the market. I'm talking to the 1 million plus buyer here. It's not actually, that's not the case. It's not 10 times. We have many cases where we see people are definitely able to and are making much more than that in relation to the value of their home. And secondly, often the people who are coming in, they've got significant savings, so they're actually very cash rich. So expanding on this first video, one of the points that was raised by RJ was the fact that there are potential home buyers who were migrating, say, from San Francisco, from California, looking to move over to Miami, and that's going to dry up.
It was the perfect recipe, that perfect blend of conditions that made these southeastern states so desirable, and the cheap home prices were a big part of that formula. So as home buyers in California begin to see home prices in their areas correct back to pre-bubble price levels, it's unlikely they're about to move across the country, especially when home prices in Florida are now just as expensive as California.
The buyers there have now seen such a drop of values in their neighborhood, in their city, that it actually makes sense to get a deal, and by there not to move here where prices are now neck and neck with New York and California, and they're much more expensive. The thing that I've noticed with that is that if you look at the fundamentals of economics and of existence as human beings, one of the most primary important drivers, and this goes back to Economics 101 or the Economics Bible, safety and security is only second to our physiological needs of warmth and food and shelter. The second need obviously is safety and security. And one of the biggest reasons that I felt when people were moving here and continue to come to me to move is because the education system is very strong. They do not feel that they are in a hostile environment, and they feel that currently the state that they're in is creating a hostile environment for them and their children. And I say that because we worry about our security, but we worry about our children's security and safety far more than we do our own. And most of the migratory people that have been coming across have been families. And also the crime that still exists, the homelessness, and some of the other harder social issues are still running true in these states. It's still a problem. And for that reason, I find it hard to digest the belief that someone's going to absolutely stop their move because of that. The primary drivers are still very much the same. And the prices may have dropped, but they are not exponentially cheaper than they are in Miami. Miami still offers lower taxes, and it has that safety security benefit. So the second video I'm going to address actually is by a guy called John Williams. And I like what John says, because some of the stuff he says is actually very poignant and true, specifically about the insurance game. And that makes this conversation more specific, because there are homeowners in certain areas that are more affected, and as buyers I want to make you very aware of those areas that might be or should be avoided when you're coming to buy a house. But to start with the video that he addressed, which is about Florida's housing market being an epic crash.
We're going to be stepping into the biggest housing bubble that ever existed, and it's going to pop.
It talks about rising foreclosures and rising costs of living, and how that raise is going to turn off potential, in some cases, the second homeowners who are going to liquidate because they need capital, because they don't need their place anymore. It's second to their need to work their way through a recession. They need the capital, so they'll pull out. When it comes to the cost of electricity and the cost of maintaining your home and all these other costs, I'm sure at the very lower level of the market, the sub 500,000, the average price, you might see some issues with that. I am not seeing it in the markets that I'm dealing with. I'm not seeing it in the luxury market. I'm not really seeing anything in the level of foreclosures or short sales. I would say again that for the 3 years that we've been selling real estate since past pandemic, obviously selling real estate since 2007, but post-pandemic, so much of those deals were still cash. Still a lot of liquidity flowing in the system. People are still able to maintain those homes, even if things get a little bit sticky, because they're not leveraged with interest rates, they're not leveraged with a mortgage, they're not so affected. And if they are on a mortgage, they're on a fixed mortgage at 3 or 4% or 5%. And they've got a lifestyle that they can maintain, that they can afford. The second point he raises is about the insurance game. And that's a real point. And that's really, really, really valid. And I believe that. And I see now, and I've done a podcast with one of the individuals who used to work for Siddons, and he's right, there are other insurance companies that are now pulling out of South Florida, and it means that more traffic, more clients are being forced to work with Siddons, government-backed, who fundamentally will start to create a monopoly-style system where their policies go from $20,000, $30,000 to $40,000, $50,000 a year, if not more. And I'm actually seeing that because I'm on the ground dealing with these clients, and it's a very real phenomenon. John Williams has some good points. So the third and final video I'm going to address is with a chap called Chris Igo. I'm not exactly sure how we say his name, so Chris, if you see this, I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong. This guy produces a lot of videos, and he talks obviously about the markets, and he's really active down here, and he does live down here in South Florida. One particular video that got my attention again is the housing market about to crash. He's got a number of videos on that. Again, I know some of it is designed to get you to click on it, so the videos aren't per se about him saying it's going to crash. But he starts to talk about the interest rate situation and how, that movement of interest rates, right now we're at 7%, and it can potentially go a little bit higher, it creates slowdown within our market.
I would be really surprised if, as we get closer to the election, we don't see mortgage interest rates trade significantly lower. And it wouldn't shock me if they trade closer to 5%.
That's not revolutionary or revelationary. It's fact, and it does create slowdown for two reasons. Number one, sellers right now are fewer and further between, because those people who did buy 2-3 years ago bought at 3 or 4 or 5%, and they really have a hard time saying, okay, so number one, I'm going to sell, and then I have to find a house where there's low inventory. Number two If I sell, I'm going to buy another house which is going to get more expensive, which means higher taxes, and most importantly, number 3, I'm going to have to refinance, and I'm going to have to finance at a higher number. So let me stay put, let me stay where I am, which is creating that lack of inventory, which means a slowdown in sales, fewer sales. Fewer sales doesn't happen because there's less demand. It happens because there's less availability. And there is a saying in the business, you marry the house and you date the mortgage. And I think it's important to know that if you are looking to buy, and again, he raises this point, so thank you, Chris, for bringing this up. He does raise the point, which is very true, that if you are going to pay 7% now and you are going to wait until it's 5%, when that happens, you get a surge of buyers coming through the market. And those buyers are then going to drive up the prices. And so you might pay on, let's say, a $3 million house, you might suddenly pay $3.5 million for that house if you're going to wait for the interest rates to drop a little bit. Because more activity, you see more people being willing to refinance and then obviously go out there and move to the better house. But a lot more buyers who are sitting on the sidelines who cannot afford to pay 7% will come flooding in. They'll push the market, they'll drive the market, and they'll want to get locked in at a 5% rate or 4% or whatever it might be. And that's going to mean that would you rather pay an extra $1,000 a month on your mortgage for the next year, year and a half, or would you like to pay $500,000 more actually buying the house to begin with? It's simple math. I don't have to explain it. The conclusive evidence that we have is within the primary markets, the luxury markets within Miami-Dade and Broward, is that we're not going to crash. There's no metrics that suggest that we can deal with a crash. People are making enough money. They are in a position where they've got a lot of cash. They are not in a position where they want to move out. We don't have an absolute stopping of people wanting to move in. That's still continuing. Admittedly, it's not as strong as it was before because Miami isn't such a deal, but it's still happening for the safety and security reasons. Now, I am a microeconomist. I'm dealing with the micro markets. I lean on other people who deal with the macro markets. I can introduce you to them. As always, pick up the phone, give me a call, shoot me an email, and thank you for watching.